Thank you. Thanks for the story. I'm guessing that when you walk down the street and you see someone who's homeless, you think about it in a different way because you have an experience of somebody you know who's been homeless. I think everybody here, if you stop and think about it, you can imagine somebody who's homeless, right? All of us walk down city streets and meet people who we imagine are homeless. They might be just standing there. They might be sitting in a park. They might be asking you for money. And I always wonder when I meet someone, I wonder about them. Are they okay? Where do they go at night? Where are they going to go when I don't see them? Will they be safe tonight? Are they going to get enough food? And these are important questions to ask, and I think all of us wonder these things, right? We see homeless people, but a key question to ask is, in a rich country like Canada, why do we have this kind of homelessness? What are we doing about it? And is what we are doing working, right? Many of you here won't realize this because you're young, but the homelessness problem in Canada is relatively recent, right? When I moved to Toronto from Calgary in the 1980s, you rarely saw people who were homeless, right? I now live right near this campus, and by the 90s, you started to see homeless people everywhere, right? You started to see a lot of homelessness. And we know why that happened, right? The research on that is pretty clear, right? Our national government got rid of a national housing policy that annually used to build 20,000 units of housing each year and then went down to zero in 1995. We had successive governments that cut back on social spending, health spending, programs for the poor. And we're left now with a homelessness crisis that is visible and is ongoing. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do about this? Now I come to this with a question, right? I'm a researcher. I'm a researcher at York University, Faculty of Education, which you might wonder where the homelessness fits in there, but it's important. But my question is, does research have a role to play in addressing our homelessness problem in Canada? Right? How do we strengthen the impact that homelessness research has on policy and practice? Is there a role for research? Now I come to this because I think that the best policy and the best solutions should involve good evidence. Right? Sometimes it involves hunches and just taking a chance, but I think we really should make good decisions, especially when we're talking about the lives of people who are very vulnerable. Right? We shouldn't just be acting on whims. Right? The stakes are very high. So research should have an impact on decision makers. It should have an impact on the services we provide. And the general public should be informed by what we know about the causes of homelessness and how we're doing. Research can have an impact on homelessness. Now the problem has been in Canada anyway, that there's this big gap between the research and policy and practice. And how do I come by this kind of interest? So there's a lot of reboots in my life, as with yours. We're moving new directions. So after I finished my PhD, I ran screaming from grad school, and that's an actual picture of me doing that. I wanted to go work outside of the university, and so I wound up at a place called Shout Clinic, which is in Toronto. It's an agency that serves homeless youth in the city, right, with the best logo in the nonprofit sector, I think. Keith Haring kind of thing. So when I was at Shout, this is in the 90s, right? If you talk to people in the sector about research, they'd say, that's a waste of money. We know what the problem is. We know what the solutions are. Why spend money on research? You could put that into a service, right? There's a real negative response to the idea that research might have a role to play. And as I worked in the sector longer, I started to think about it differently. And I'll give you an example. One of the things when I worked at Shout Clinic that we knew was that a lot of young people were getting beat up by police, right? I could give you stories about how to do it. Not that I want to give people advice on how to do it, but people were getting beat up by the police, right? And so in the community, they said, we have to do something about this. So they managed to get some young people to come forward and speak to the press about their experiences of being beat up. And the police response was typical of how they deal with these kind of allegations. The first thing they did is deny it and say, that's not evidence. Two people telling stories, they're homeless, that's anecdotal. And then the second part, is, which always follows, is, and even if it is true, it's the one bad apple story. There's a few bad cops, but it's not a systemic problem. So I thought, there's a problem with the advocacy here, right? Because stories are important, but without evidence to back up the stories, they get swept aside. And a very important issue, 16-year-olds getting beat up who don't have a home, gets swept away. The second thing that happened is in the late 90s in Toronto, as the homelessness problem grew bigger, we started to see more people panhandling and squeegeeing. So many of you remember that. We had a mayor at that time who, named Mel Lastman, who talked about thugs and criminals, and I'm afraid to drive my car downtown because somebody might, that this will destroy tourism in Toronto, because you can imagine people in Buffalo saying, I don't want to come to Toronto because somebody might wash my window, So the myth started circulating, that these aren't homeless youth, these are brats from Oakville. I don't know why Oakville, but that tended to be singled out. And so, having worked in the sector, I knew people who panhandled and squeegeed. I did a lot of outreach and a lot of work with it, and I knew that when people panhandle and squeegee, they usually do it for the same reason that you and I might do it, same reason why I work, because I'm hungry, I need food. It allows me to make purchases that are my choice, not an agency's choice. So we decided to do some research on that. And we did the first large-scale research project on street youth and money-making actually in the world. And used that research when the province was deciding to legislate the Safe Streets Act. And so we learned a lot about that, because one of the things we learned is that policy isn't always driven by evidence. The report was taken up in the provincial legislature, but at the end of the day, they moved forward with the legislature. So anyway, working in the sector, it was clear there wasn't a lot of interest in research within the sector, but I was feeling like there's a need for it. Then I went to work for the City of Toronto. Now, in civic government, in all levels of government, they are more interested in research. But the problem was getting the research and finding it. So if the city, for instance, like the way things work if you work for the city, council will say, we need you to address an issue and come up with something because we're going to discuss it in 2 weeks. So come up with a position. So you scrambled to come up with a position. Like, should street youth serving agencies give food to people who are living outdoors? Or should we try to encourage them to go into agencies? So as a staff member, you have to come up with research that justifies a position. And working with the city, I found it's really hard to find homelessness research. And it would really help policymakers make better decisions. So finally, to close the reboot loop, I wound up back at York University in a faculty of education and was delighted, but then kind of felt alone, because York University, all of you know, is huge, right? But I didn't know anybody else who was interested in homelessness research, and wondered, if there was a possibility to create an interest in this research. So one of the things I did is work with some other people that I knew from outside the university, and we thought, why don't we do a conference on homelessness that is research focused and brings together researchers, service providers, policymakers, and people who have experienced homelessness. We did that in 2005, the very first conference of its kind in Canada, and it was an amazing success. We didn't know how many researchers there were in Canada. We were hoping for maybe, we're hoping like, if we get 80 paper submissions, that would be amazing. And someone said, no, there's only like 25 researchers in all of the country. At the end of the day, we had 360 presentations, right? So there's this huge group of people who are interested in research. So why does this matter when it comes to thinking about homelessness? Let's go back to that story. When you see that person in the street, where do they go at night? And what have we done in Canada to deal with homelessness? And what role should research play? Now, if you think about dealing with homelessness, there are 3 things you can do. You can stop people from becoming homeless in the first place through prevention. You can deal with them while they're homeless through providing emergency services, drop-ins, shelters, soup kitchens, that kind of thing. Or you can move them out of homelessness as quickly as possible. In Canada, the bulk of our effort has been focused on the middle part. Right? We've invested heavily in homeless shelters. There's one in Calgary they purpose-built with over 1,000 beds, most of it congregate living. There's one in Toronto with over 600 beds, lots of drop-ins, right? And here comes that big question. Is that okay? Is that the way we should be dealing with it? Would it be okay for you to sleep in a room with 50 people you don't know? As an adult, would it be okay for you to have a curfew? Would it be okay for you to have absolutely no choice about what you eat? Right? And to have to always eat with a group of people, many of whom you don't know. It raises a question, because sometimes we think we have a good solution, but we really should ask that big question. Are we doing the right thing? And I'll tell you a quick story. It's kind of a joke, but anyway. There's a woman walks down the street and she meets somebody who's like on his hands and knees under a street lamp. And she goes, "What are you doing?" He says, "I lost my wallet. I'm trying to find it." And she goes, "Well, tell me what happened." He points over to the dark side of the street and says, "I was walking over there and I, had my hand on my wallet and it flipped out of my hand and I can't find it." She said, "You did it on the other side of the street?" He goes, "Yes." "Well, why are you looking over here?" And he says, "Because the light's better." Right? Sometimes we think we're doing the right thing and looking at the right place for solutions, and we're not. And so that's where we need to do the rebooting. Right? And I think with the homelessness crisis in Canada, that's what we need to do. We need to switch our focus from emergency services to invest in prevention and stopping people from becoming homeless, right? A more dignified solution. And we need to move people out of homelessness as soon as they get into the emergency sector. So how does research then, if I can make this work, my phaser's stuck. Okay, the key challenge then is that homelessness research has not, until recent years, had the impact on policy and practice that it could. How do we create the impact? So one of the things we've done is we've created the Canadian Homelessness Research. This came out of the York University Conference in 2005, and we linked together researchers with service providers, with politicians and people in government, and with people who experience homelessness. Okay, I'm getting the 2-minute warning here. One of the key pieces of work we've done in this project is the Homeless Hub, which you can check out. I recommend you do. Which is a web-based research library on homelessness. And so what we've done here is we've considered all the audiences that we would like to have exposure to research. So it's not just policymakers and service providers, but it's the media and the general public. Because policy won't shift unless the public demands a shift. And so we've created this site that has a research library that is searchable. It's the largest library on homelessness in the world, by far. We also have things like curriculum materials. We've got a section where people who have experienced homelessness tell their stories. We have arts-based things in there as well, and supports for doing research. Now, having a website is not enough. You can put it there and it's just sitting there, right? And you think, wow, now we have a website, problem solved. The problem's bigger than that, because people don't necessarily want to read articles that I write, right? I don't even want to read them all the time. We have to take the research and repackage it like mushrooms into something new. So we've created different ways of pushing the research out, which includes open access books and documents that are free. It includes custom curriculum units so teachers can draw from research to teach at all levels, and blogs where we talk about issues but link it to research. The other thing we've done, okay, is think about new ways of delivery. So we get away from the site just on its own. But also we used more traditional methods like emailing newsletters out to people. But we also use Twitter, and everybody who's tweeting now, please tweet about this. And check out Homeless Hub. And we also have a Facebook site where we generate content that is very plain language and release information that relates to homelessness that is research-based every single day. So if you go to the Facebook site and like it, then you will get this kind of information. And so how are we doing then, to wrap up here? Is it working? Well, since that first conference, we've now had 2 more conferences, right? But conferences aren't enough. What I'm seeing across Canada is a growing connection between the research community and the policymakers and service providers. In Victoria, BC, St. John's, Newfoundland. A couple of years ago, the government of Canada wanted to close down a program called Insight in Vancouver, which is a safe injection site. The research community pulled together 30 top articles that showed why this is a good program and fought back. So research became a stick to beat back bad decisions. Alberta, there's some Albertans here. Alberta is actually leading the way in its response to homelessness in Canada. Many of you may not know that. City of Calgary, for instance. They actively engage researchers in their decision making and creating solutions. There's an active engagement that's possible. The City of Toronto is now starting to use more data-driven ways of thinking about research. So we're seeing a huge progress from the days where people say, we don't need research. Now people see not only that we do need research, but they're seeing the outcomes of it. And hopefully we're going to move to a situation where we shrink that emergency response for just when people have things go really wrong, and do what we can to treat people with dignity by allowing them to have the same things that we all want, which is a door that we can close, enough food, and dignity. So thank you.